All right. I'd like to call the Winterville Town Council Stormwater Workshop to order. The invocation will be given by Councilman Johnny Moore, and pledge of allegiance will be led by me.
Let us pray. Father God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for allowing us to be here tonight to represent a wonderful town that you allowed us to be, and we give you the glory and the honor. We do not take our assignment lightly. We thank you so much for our staff that we have here and this great citizen and a wonderful town that we consider as a slice of good life. And we thank you and give you glory. Amen.
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 If everyone would please stand, face the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And again, I'd like to thank everybody for coming out tonight to our stormwater workshop. I think it's going to be a real good learning experience for us all. And I'd like to thank the people that are participating in this workshop. Do we have a quorum?
Yes.
Okay. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Got a motion to approve the agenda? In a second?
Second.
I got a second. Mr. Smith made a motion, second by Councilman Moore. All in favor, vote by saying aye. Aye. Okay, motion carried. Items for discussion. Terry or Brian?
Well, I'm just going to give a couple of introductory comments. First of all, thanks to everyone joining us this evening. The whole purpose of tonight's workshop is to spread some education regarding stormwater and the different facets thereof, and hopefully to have both council, staff, and citizens have a better understanding afterward about stormwater-related issues. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to Brian.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Pleasure to be with you guys tonight. So if I could, before we get started, I'd like to see who's with us on Zoom. There's a phone number, 412-1245. Can you please just identify yourself so we can make a record of your attendance? You're on mute. If you could just unmute yourself and identify yourself, please. Okay, maybe not. We'll move forward. Well, yeah, thank you guys for, oh, go ahead. Oh, it's Ms. Chun?
Ms. Chun.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, thank you guys for attending tonight. So I'm not going to get too far into it because I'm going to let the experts on stormwater go. But obviously this stems from the amount of development that we have going on in town. So we want to make sure that we're diligent in our responsibilities to ensure that the stormwater requirements are met. So with that being said, we've got, hey, Ms. Chun, will you please mute your phone, please? Thank you. So with that being said, so we got Kendall Paramore. He's the district manager for Southeast Drainage Corporation. So let Kendall go through the role of Southeast Drainage and what they expect from the town when we do developments within their easements. Then Will Larson is our town engineer, consulting with Wooten Company. So Will will just kind of go through what he looks for, what the requirements are, all that kind of good stuff. And then Dr. Bill Hunt with NC State, he's probably the foremost expert on stormwater BMPs in the state of North Carolina. He's going to give a presentation somewhere around 5:30, 5:45. So going into leading after Kendall and Will's presentations. So I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to turn it over to Kendall. See if that's going to show up. Yeah, Kendall, whenever you're ready. Then all you gotta do is hit forward and you're good to go.
All right. First of all, thank you, Brian. Thank you, council, for inviting me tonight for the workshop. It's always exciting for me to come back home. My name is Kendall Paramore, and I am the district manager for the Southeastern Drainage Office. I have been, I've had this position now almost 2 years. I've had the opportunity to go around different municipalities and community to speak, but it's nice to come home. And I say that because this is home. I was born and raised here in Winterville and throughout the Winterville community all my life. Got a family member sitting on the council, and so it's a privilege to be here. The Southeastern Drainage Office, this was, I love this logo. I designed it myself. But anyways, we didn't have one, so we got one now. The mission statement that we have right now, we are committed to assisting North Carolina drainage districts, corporations in the management of land ownership and financial records for proper operation and maintenance of their projects. We were established in 1994. To begin this presentation, I want to go through a little background with you on who we are, what we are, because a lot of people don't know. They just see, they might hear or see something on a plan that says Southeastern Drainage Office or a drainage district here or there, but they don't know who or what we are. So that is our mission statement. The officers of the Southeastern Drainage Office, Ephraim Smith is our president, Wayne Lofton is our vice president. Some of you probably know Benji Forrest, who's on the Board of Education, Johnny Penner from Belvoir. Earl Harper serves with us, he's from Lenoir County. Tommy Harrell was also one of the original members, he's from Chowan County. Many people think that we are a Pitt County drainage association or entity within itself. We are not. We have a large footprint. Pitt County is just one of the counties under that. You can see listed in front of you, we've got 12 counties listed, and right now we're in the process of adding additional counties. As far south as we go right now is Jones County. However, we will soon be going down toward Lumberton, Wilmington, and even as far west as Johnston County. So we are growing. This is a lot of drainage districts having a lot of problems, a lot of issues coming up, and we'll talk about some of that. But as you can see, we do have a large footprint. The roles of the Southeastern Drainage Office. We partner with the drainage districts themselves to help maintain mains and laterals that are registered. These ditches, these canals are registered with the clerk of court. And so what we do is we partner with them. We come along beside. Many of the drainage districts have us help them. Now, some of the drainage districts like to do it on their own. The one you currently sit in, we help that drainage district. What we do is we come along beside, we help schedule the maintenance, we go out and do our checks, spot checks of things. We also write the contracts and advertising for the mowing that takes place. Beaver management. Beaver management is a huge problem that we face every day. We have 4 trappers right now that operate here in Pitt County. We've trapped over 24 beaver in Winterville alone in the last 18 months. And so they are very evasive, and they are a nuisance to us. Preventative maintenance is something that we'll talk about a little bit more here in a few minutes. But preventative maintenance is Winterville, okay? When you look at what we're doing in Winterville right now, and we'll go through that in a minute, you'll see what the preventative maintenance is. Tax assessment. This is probably the biggest part of my job. I work with the drainage districts, and I help go through every time there's a parcel that is split, it has to be reassessed for drainage. Now, what falls under here in the town of Winterville, that's all included based on your land mass. Y'all pay the drainage district approximately $13,000 a year. Not quite. Last year it was in the $12,500. But we'll get to that in a minute. But that is the role of the drainage office. What we do not do. Now this is a very important slide because a lot of people have no clue what we don't do. And I get phone calls from people all the time wanting me to come do some of these things. Roadside ditches and driveway tiles, we know that's the DOT's responsibility. Ditches that were not established as part of the drainage district. Back when there was a court case back in the 1980s that established the drainage district, particularly Pit 3 and 7, where we are at now, the ditches were established. Those are the ditches that we have right-of-ways on that we work on. Other ditches that are around people's homes and people's fields, that's not in our jurisdiction. So those fall under the landowner. PJ and I have worked together on some of those in the past, and we have to work with the landowner to get them to cooperate to clean out their ditches. And then this is a big one, and this is something that's becoming more and more of a problem, is the rivers. Winterville falls within the Neuse River Basin. North of the river, Blackjack area, that's the Tar River Basin. The rivers in North Carolina are in need of some attention in a bad way. Now, how that all gets done and when all that takes place, it's going to take a lot of money and a lot higher than my pay grade, but it is something that needs attention. No matter what we do, we can keep our ditches as clean as we possibly can. But if the water backs up from the rivers, I can't stop that. And so, and we have had that. We have situations like Hurricane Floyd, Hurricane Matthew, etc. Those things happen. And that's because the water just simply has nowhere to go. The governing bodies for the Drainage Office. We operate under the General Statute 156, North Carolina General Statutes. We also operate under what's called a PL 566, which is provided by the NRCS office. These two documents basically give a lot of control to the drainage commissioners. That's who I work for. The Southeastern Drainage Office Executive Board also has control as well. Facts about the drainage district. Okay? Each drainage district operates independently of each other, and they are controlled by its own drainage commissioners. You say, why is that the case? Well, one of the main reasons that is the case is because what happens here in Winterville is not necessarily the same thing that may happen in Pactolus. You have different soil types. You have different, the soil types is the main thing, but you also have other different factors. How far it is from the river, how close it is to different things, and that is a factor that you have to deal with differently. So we don't operate the same here as we would somewhere else. The tax is different here than it is in other drainage districts. There's other drainage districts that have a much higher tax. There's some drainage districts, because of their location, may have a little bit lower drainage tax. Each district receives a different amount of tax, which is set by the commissioners. Some people think I set the tax. I do not. That is done by our commissioners. Drainage canals. Now, here's an interesting piece of information for you. The drainage canals were originally dug for 2 to 5 year storms and for agricultural purposes only. As we continue to grow, we have to keep this in mind and keep cognizant of this. Where this is really a problem is as you get further south of here, around the county line of Craven County line and down in that area, a good rain, you're going to see the water out of the banks of the canals, and some people have lost some of their properties. Is not as accessible as it used to be because of water flow, and there's just not a whole lot we can do about that. We just have to keep it as open as we possibly can. Habitats and drainage districts. Here's an interesting, there's a couple of interesting pictures here. These are the things that we face a lot. It is not uncommon for us to see a black bear on the drainage canals. We've seen them as close as Aden, a little south of here at the end of Church Street on some of those canals. On the bottom left, it is a hotbed for water moccasins. The beavers in the top middle, that is our #1 nuisance animal, and in the bottom is an animal that creates a lot of problems for us that people don't realize, and that is called a nutria. They are basically like a cousin to the muskrat. The nutria basically bury themselves into the canal banks, And when we get a lot of water, the water flows into those holes and creates a lot of erosion problems. Therefore, we have to address that. You see a picture of an alligator. You say, why you got a picture of an alligator? That alligator picture was actually, it was not taken in Winterville, but it was taken very close to here in Roundtree. We are experiencing a number of alligator in our canals, particularly around Grifton, the Tar River, around Pactolus, and then we've also seen them at the end of Swift Creek, just as you go into Craven County. They are here. We are not the Everglades by any means, but we have to be made aware that they are around. And then, of course, in the bottom right, you have the rattlesnake, and we see a lot of those when we get around September, October. All right, let's talk about the Winterville Drainage District. Winterville falls within the Pitt County Drainage District number 3. Yes, as I mentioned before, you are the Neuse River Basin. You are in the Neuse River Basin. The two major swamps that affect Winterville are Swift Creek and Fork Swamp. Swift Creek begins just north of Thomas Langston Road behind Lowe's. Fork Swamp begins just north of Fire Tower Road where I was raised, and both of them flow south. Swift Creek will come up behind South Central High School, and then it'll flow down here between Winterville and Ayden. Fork Swamp pretty much parallels Old Tar Road, and then out there where Christ Covenant School is, and it eventually dumps into Swift Creek once you get south of 102. These are the two major canals in southern Pitt County. Winterville is affected by both of them. The approximate tax charge to the town is $13,000. That's what the town pays. Now, if you do not live within the town city limits, then each one of those parcels is assessed individually, okay? The minimum amount that a parcel would pay, I think it's $30 for the year. These are your drainage commissioners. These are the ones that help make the decisions for your drainage districts, Ephraim Smith, Wayne Lofton, Shade Bland, Johnny Caraway, who's a Winterville fellow, Grover Hardy, Carlton Venters, who just opened up the the Farm Bureau agency here in Winterville, and Gene Davenport. Here's a good map, and I'm going to step up here for just a minute. You can see, according to this map, there's Winterville. Everything right in here, this is all Fork Swamp. On this side is all Swift Creek. The main channel that runs in the center, we call that the main. All the ditches that run off all the ditches that run off, we call those laterals. Now, Fork Swamp, this is Fire Tower Road right here. You can see right up here, that is Thomas Langston Road. And then you can see how Swift Creek is intertwined. You can see the Winterville, and then this is Old Tar Road here. And you can see how Fork Swamp is very important. That area and this side of the town. Those are the two main canals in that help the Winterville stormwater. A couple more slides. All right, so let's talk about what we're doing in Winterville. This will be, and I may need to back up just a second. Some of y'all have seen one of the main projects that we're working on, actually started working on it again today. Over here, where you have the Sarah Law ball field, about right in here, right in this area. Somewhere out in here. You can look down Highway 11, and you can look between going back towards the Winterville. Going through there, we've got about 7 or 8 pipes that need to be replaced. These were pipes that were originally put in, and I call this preventative maintenance. So these pipes that were originally put in, when we now those pipes are starting to fail. They can stay in there a little longer, but we went ahead and replaced it. We also took what we call a mulching machine. backside, and then it eventually gets to where it just wants to fall into the canal, holding back water. So we bought a mulching kit, we tried a couple of years ago to spray it. Turns it brown, the next year it comes back just big as ever. So we've got a mulching head on the end of the backhoe, and we are going to clean that up. You can see where we've been doing that down here at the end of Church Street, all the way across next to the rental place. It goes across Highway 11, and there's a church over there, it's right up beside that. But all of that water's coming from the end of Church Street. You can also see where we've been behind Church Street and done some work over there. We have mowed both of these areas twice in the last 2 years. What I want to eventually get to the place where we mow every year. You say, well, we mowed part of it last year and part of it this year. I want us to get to the place where we're mowing every single year, every single ditch, the whole way. You say, why haven't you done that? It takes a lot of revenue to do that. And I'll say this, in the Winterville, Fork Swamp, Swift Creek alone, in the last 18 months, we spent north of $200,000 on just going through maintenance of the canals. You say, well, how can you do that when, you know, say Winterville's only given $13,000 and, you know, we're not taking in that amount of money. We have partnered with the North Carolina, some legislators out of the North Carolina General Assembly, and with something that's never been done before to help offset costs. We're not just going to sit here and continue to raise taxes. That's not being a good steward and being a good neighbor of the folks, citizens here. So we've gone to the North Carolina legislation. They are helping us out to help offset the cost of what we are, and we're getting grants to help move forward with some of these things. So that's been a great thing for us. Some more work that we're doing here, obviously beaver trapping, mulching. We've done some work around Frog Level behind, like I told you, behind South Central High School, mulching near the Jack Jones Road. Laurie Ellis flows down there. And then one of the main things when I first took over that needed to happen was we had a lot of downed trees and we had a lot of debris that was all the way to Craven County, and that was affecting municipalities like Winterville, Aden, etc., because Fork Swamp and Swift Creek flow into there. We're also working, one of your major problems, and this is a hard for us to do. One of the major problems is cleaning the trestle between over by the it's down there by the Free Will Baptist Press. Last slide. Challenges that we face. Obviously, with more development, we're having more volume of water. We are experiencing some downstream flooding, and the more water we deal with, we are seeing a little more erosion. That's why it's very important for us to do our due diligence to try to keep the canals as clean, to have the water flows out of here as fast as possible, so we don't have a lot of bottleneck. Pedestrian traffic. You say, well, how are you having pedestrian traffic? One of the ways, and it's very dangerous, is a lot of parents will buy their children four-wheelers or dirt bikes, etc., and they'll turn them loose on these canals. It's nothing for me to be riding through there and I find where one's been left because the kid couldn't get it out of the ditch. That's how I found pickup trucks. We found all kinds of stuff. Trash. People think that this is a trash site when you've got a wonderful dump right down here in Winterville. I don't understand why they couldn't use that, but it's not as much of a problem in Winterville, but as you get further down outside of this area, we find tires, we find large debris that we ended up having to clean up ourselves. The challenge of development, obviously, the more impervious surface that we create, the less ground area that we have for water to seep into the ground. That's created with rooftops, that's created with asphalt, concrete, you name it. And then the final thing is just the general public fencing, people like to put things in our way, which is always, it's always a fun to deal with, but people like to put fencing or boats or cars or trucks or whatever. That's kind of a brief overview for me to give you a synopsis of who we are, what we do, how we serve you here in Winterville. If y'all got any questions, I'd be more than happy to entertain anything that you got.
Thank you, Mr. Paramore. Anybody have any questions for Mr. Paramore?
It's good information, cousin.
Thank you, cuz.
Commissioners, what's their term of office? What's the term of office for the commissioners?
The term of office for the commissioners, there isn't one.
You just serve.
Like
They just-
Supreme
they-
Court, huh?
They just serve, the clerk of court has to approve them being they report to them, and they report to Sarah Beth, should I say, and she, says yay or nay on their term and when they, how long they stay.
So they're not appointed through the commissioners or anything?
They can be appointed through the commissioners, but it has to go through a pretty
Lengthy, right.
process with her on how that works.
Okay, that's
That-
interesting.
Yeah, I don't have to
Right.
get
deal
too
with it.
involved with that.
I understand that, yeah.
So, anything else?
Yeah, I just like to say that what I have seen in the last 6 months, a lot of ditches, near around our community has been cleaned out. And it looks really great.
Thank you.
That's the best I have seen in many years. Like you said, that I know that you said that you can't do it every year. Right now, you're doing it every 2 years, but you would like to do it every year. But I tell you, if you can keep it going, it will be a tremendous help for us all in the community.
Yes, sir, and I appreciate that, and we're working as hard as we can to do that. And that's the goal, and that's where I want us to take it.
And I saw something on your slide, I think it was very interesting, and I hope the general public was listening to that. And when you said that these canals pretty much was dug for agricultural purposes, and now we're switching over, people buying this farmland now, turning them to subdivisions. And, and they're basically 2 to 5 years lifetime,
That's right.
so,
Well, and the other thing is, and I appreciate you pointing that out, the other thing is we can't, based upon the regulation that the state provides and in different entities, we can't make them deeper, we can't make them wider. And one of the things that I think it would be good to note, when you take Swift Creek down to the Craven County line and you get across 118, we're at sea level, okay? Think about that. You're at sea level. You can't go any deeper. And so the fall in that creek was well designed way back then, but again, that was for agricultural purposes. Now that we have more water, we have to do a better job. These commissioners we have to do a better job of maintaining what we got.
yes. Thank you. Thank you again.
Yes, sir.
Next up is Will Lawson with the Wooten Company.
It's good to see Will back. We've been telling Will we're going to get him an office here in Town Hall. It's at least 2 or 3 times a week now, right?
Thank you, thank you.
Well, thank you for coming back.
Give me one, but I know how to find yes.
Paramore, Kendall.
Thank you.
So I will mention that Kendall's a member of our technical review committee, so he does get a chance to comment or review all of our plans. So anything that impacts the drainage laterals, he has an opportunity to make sure that, his requirements are being met as well. So I just wanted to make sure you guys are aware of that.
And also, while you're doing that, Brian, I just want to acknowledge that we do have P.J. Andrews with the county from Soil and Water, our Soil and Water District, out in the audience with us tonight.
Did we get questions from the people? See if they got any questions for Ms. Paramore before we move on?
Brian, do.
Should we ask the people that are on Zoom if they have questions for Ms. Paramore?
Yeah, Ms. Chun, I don't know if you had any questions for Mr. Paramore, but before we moved on, I want to give you an opportunity, since you're the only participant via Zoom.
Yeah, I heard that the maintenance is up to the homeowners, but what if you maintain a ditch for several years and then a developer comes and causes the ditch to cave in, then what?
So, Ms. Chun, please, once you get done with your question, mute because we're getting feedback.
Okay, that question is probably more directed toward, I would say, the county at that point. What we maintained, and I hate to pass the buck to you, but and I can probably, I might can help you with this. So what we are responsible to maintaining is what falls within the drainage laterals. We have an easement and a right-of-way to get to those laterals. These are the main blue line canals. They are not allowed to be filled in. They are protected by the state government, and that's what we work to maintain. When you get outside of that jurisdiction, what I can do, what I'm allowed to do, it stops. And so to answer your question, at that point, if a ditch is filled in because of a subdivision, that would probably be a question where the designer has designed the property and he's also worked to, reroute water in other places for that subdivision. And so the engineer would, he would basically come up with the calculations on how and why and the process of what that looks like. Does that answer your question?
Thank you, Ms.
I guess my question is, no. I guess my question is, what we've encountered is the development behind us it actually was developed. They put a pipe in, then they took the pipe out, and they took all the trees out. It caved in.
Ma'am, what development are you speaking of?
I know you're rich. There's Blue Jam?
What is our
That's where she
report
lives.
now? We're in that Magnolia Ridge subdivision.
Okay, so basically back there, we maintain, what my office does is we help maintain Swift Creek, the one canal back there. If you don't mind muting yourself.
Yeah. Ms. Chun, could you mute it, please, because we're getting feedback?
Okay, so we maintain Swift Creek, which is beyond the subdivision. My office, we don't have anything to do with because it's outside of my right-of-way and it's outside of my jurisdiction, we don't have anything to do with where that actual development is in that process. I don't have any regulation to manage that. That would be left up to the engineers and probably the planning department.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Mr. Parker, Brian, council, thank you for having me. I am Will Larson with the Wooten Company, 2 times in the same month, so I feel privileged to be in front of you once again. I very much appreciate your questions towards Mr. Paramore. I think you'll find that dovetails very well into some of the topics that I'll cover. And then not knowing what Dr. Hunt will speak of, I think he'll further elaborate on some of the issues that you've raised. What I would like to do tonight is not necessarily get into the weeds, so to speak, of stormwater. I think Dr. Hunt will cover that much more eloquently than I could ever do. But what I would like to do is give you an idea of what happens when a technical review comes in. What are some of the steps that we go through as the reviewing party on behalf of the town? Why do we do that, and what regulations essentially provide the bumpers or the guide rails that we stay in between as we're reviewing? What you'll hear tonight is a lot of very common themes. For instance, my first slide or two is about the Neuse River Basin. As Kendall was describing, the town of Winterville is located in the Neuse River Basin, and there's several reasons why that is important, not only for you, but for development as well as your constituents and citizens of the town. So the top right picture, I have all of the river basins on the central and eastern side of the state, and then the picture down below, you can see we've highlighted just the Neuse Basin itself. We've got a simple arrow showing where the town of Winterville falls. You are right there on the northern portion of the Neuse Basin. In fact, really, once you get across Fire Tower Road, you've left the Neuse Basin and you're now in the Tar River Basin. So at that point, the majority of the flow would go back towards Greenville, towards the north. The Neuse River Basin is one of the largest river basins within the state. In fact, the Neuse River is the single largest river in the state, extending all the way from Raleigh down to the Sound, approximately 250 miles. One of the reasons why it's so important the town of Winterville is located in this basin is some of the stipulations and the limitations that are placed within the larger basin. What you'll see and hear throughout tonight's discussion is that between the Neuse Basin and the Tar Pam Basin, these are 2 of the most protected river basins really on the eastern side of the country. Certainly the Chesapeake Bay in Virginia, and once you get to New York and some of the more urban areas have similar restrictions, but for such a rural setting, these are 2 of the most regulated basins on the eastern side of the country. One of the primary reasons for that, particularly for the Neuse Basin, you can see on that 3rd bullet, is the export of nutrients, and in particular, the export of nitrogen. So nitrogen, as we all know from grade school, is a naturally occurring element. It's found in the air, it's found in the ground, in plants, everything. But as nitrogen gets released from atmosphere, it falls onto every surface, pavement, plants, everything. When rainwater comes, it naturally releases some of this nitrogen into the stormwater runoff. Where that comes into play is the Neuse River Basin has an abundance, actually an exceedance of nitrogen. A little bit of it is good, a lot of it is bad. And we find ourselves on the a lot of it side of the discussion. Essentially too much nitrogen for the Tar Pam Basin, the nitrogen and phosphorus, can create algae blooms. It can really upset the ecosystem balance downstream of where it enters into the water stream. We find ourselves here in Pitt County, the fortunate or unfortunate beneficiaries of everything that happens upstream. So as I mentioned, the Neuse Basin starts in Wake County and close to Durham, there at the Falls Reservoir. So everything that happens in Raleigh, Johnson County, Smithfield, Benson, all of that flows downstream, and we are one of the downstream recipients of that. That fourth bullet there is kind of the other emerging issue, the emerging threat to the basin. And that comes with the rapid increase of development. What we mean by development is just to your questions earlier. So every time we have a new subdivision, every time that we have a new single-site commercial, every time that we have a large industrial or institutional development, we're modifying and adapting the land cover. As we were talking about, a lot of our current agricultural areas are being converted to subdivisions. That's great for tax base, that's great for the citizens moving there. However, on the stormwater side, rooftops, sidewalks, driveways, roadways, et cetera, certainly do not allow for infiltration like crops, open terrain, forest, things of that nature. And we'll dive into a little bit of that and how that plays a part as we move on. I won't go into detail because Kendall did such a wonderful job talking about Fork Swamp and Swift Creek, but there's two others that are of importance specific to the town of Winterville. Noble Canal, which runs right across Railroad Street and Mill Street, and then Gum Swamp. Both of those are named streams, and we refer to them as blue line streams. And I'll spare you the details and the dissertation on why that's important for this evening. As I mentioned, there's several things that kind of guide the reasons why we're concerned about stormwater, the limitations we have on stormwater, and some of the things that we have to evaluate when it comes to stormwater. We'll start very large and work our way more specific to the town of Winterville, but starting back in 1970 was the creation of the EPA. Shortly thereafter, you can see in 1972 was the Clean Water Act. These were really the two fundamental pieces that are the guiding regulatory bodies and regulatory legislation that we're seeing today. Most of our requirements, our regulations stem from their early creation. I've got a lot of elongated terms and some abbreviations, so I'll say them once and refrain for the rest of the evening, but the Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System, we'll refer to it from here on out as MS4, is one of the newer terms that you'll hear across development, across economic development, and when we come to permits and regulation, that is a term that we need to become more and more familiar with. The town of Winterville is considered an MS4 community, and that, if you look on the chart on the right-hand side, or the map rather, this is from 2009, so it is a little bit dated. It's directly from EPA. But the two things I wanted to point out here are the color coding. Obviously, phase 1 is in green and phase 2 is in blue. So phase 1 is the larger urban areas. Think of Norfolk, DC, Philadelphia. You have the New York metropolitan area. These expansive cities, expansive urban areas. So those became enacted in 1990. 1999, this program has grown to what we call phase 2. This is where Winterville finds yourself today, a phase 2 community. It's a little bit difficult to read there in the green block, but in 2009, what they were trying to show is that phase 1 and phase 2 communities represented 4% of the land mass of the United States. However, they encapsulate 80% of population. So if you think about that, that ties directly back to what I said, very urban areas, very developed areas, and areas that are prone to a large export of stormwater, high development, large roadways, rooftops, et cetera, et cetera. The primary driver and the primary reason for the MS4 program, the phase 1, phase 2 program, if you will, is to create and implement programs and practices that control polluted stormwater runoff. That is the nuts and bolts of the entire program boiled down to one sentence. Everything that we'll talk about further and all the additional regulations, the requirements, everything comes back to that one statement. It's a way to control and regulate and try to prevent stormwater pollution. Diving a little bit more local, so what does that mean more specific to North Carolina? What does that mean more specific to the town of Winterville? As I mentioned, Winterville is considered a Phase 2 community, very similar, if not larger requirements than the original Phase 1. Now that we are into an MS4 designation, you can see there it really starts to put the onus of implementation and programs to the local level. We discussed at the last council meeting the necessity to create an MS4 compliant report. It is something that council is allowing the Wooten Company to do on your behalf. And so looking there at the bullets on the bottom left, these are some of the items that we're going through in the creation of this larger document. These are the 6 minimum items that encapsulate what is considered an approved stormwater master plan or a management plan. They put a lot of focus on public education and outreach, public involvement and participation. You can see where they've started their priorities, gaining some insight from the public, gaining some buy-in so that it's not just a few people, not a few organizations trying to dictate the larger outreach. Illicit discharge detection and elimination. There's a lot of different parts, pieces, programs, things that are involved in that, but essentially trying to find where runoff and potential pollution sources are coming from where they shouldn't be. Think of somebody that has taken a washing machine and piped it to the curb and gutter rather than running it through the sewer system. Things of that nature, or an air conditioning unit that may be leaking and you can see it during dry weather where there shouldn't be flow, but yet there is flow coming in through a pipe, things like that. Number 4, the construction site runoff. This is really kind of the bread and butter of where Wooten falls into our relationship with the town of Winterville. Number 4 and number 5. The post-construction site runoff. We'll get into that in a little bit more detail here in just a couple slides. And then finally, the pollution prevention and good housekeeping for municipal operations. It's a fancy way of saying make sure that as a municipality and as an entity that you're doing the common sense things to prevent pollutions. A very good example is when you have a maintenance shop, you have a vehicle storage bay or chemical storage bay, that you've implemented some things to prevent spills, prevent anything from gaining access to a surface water body, a ditch, a canal, things of that nature. On the right-hand side, before we move on, very specific to Winterville, now that we have established you guys are an MS4 community, the 2 big takeaways that you need to keep in mind are once this document is submitted, it's approved by the state, moving forward, the town does need to go ahead and plan for and allot staff resources and a little bit of financial resources for an annual self-assessment. Essentially putting your staff in a position where they're trained and are able to go through this list, make sure that they're checking all the boxes, they're going through the proper procedure, making sure that everything is up to date on an annual basis. Once every 5 years, the state will come in and do an outside party audit of your MS4 status and the program that you are running through. The last audit was conducted last year. It was the first audit the town had gone through. There were not a whole lot of parts and pieces in place at that time. And so the result of that audit, as you might imagine, was a little bit more on the negative side than the positive, but we are correcting those items and bringing the town back into compliance and working rapidly to do so. Leaving some of the MS4 discussion and looking a little bit more specific to some of the operations that the state is going through. Currently, the state is overriding and updating a lot of the stormwater ordinances across the entire Neuse and Tar-Pamlico Basin. The amendment that council was gracious enough to pass during your last meeting, that's what this was for, is to allow us, as your consultant, to integrate the ordinance into the larger stormwater management plan. What this is doing in a nutshell is the state has provided a model ordinance of recommendations and things that you can implement on a reporting side, on a tracking side, and allowing the town to tweak this and make it unique to your specific situation. You can see there towards the middle of the page, the town of Winterville is one of 14 entities that are newly created into this program. Everything from Apex all the way through Winterville, Wilson, Nash counties, so on and so forth. This rule is expected to hit sometime in the spring, March of 2023. And the big takeaway from this is with this new ordinance, there are going to be an increased level of review up front. There's going to be an increased level of staff and tracking of these approved plans. And then ultimately, it will increase some of the reporting requirements that you have to do. As I mentioned, this is something that both basins are going through right now, and so you're not alone in this endeavor. And with some of this ordinance and things, it will certainly get you guys off on the right foot. So we'll shed a little bit of the regulation talk and look a little bit more specifically now at an example or what happens when a potential project, a subdivision, a commercial property comes into the town for development. So the very first place that a project starts is in your planning department with Brian, with Stephen. They are typically the first point of contact with the developer or a potential development. They collect and gather all of the different parts and pieces of the design. This includes everything from the stormwater calculations, plans, copies of any permits, operation and maintenance agreements that the developer has put in, but it also includes your utilities. It includes consideration for fire, EMS, electrical service. All of your different departments are part of this development review committee. After all the materials are gathered, your planning department distributes to each of the respective members of the DRC. I've gotten there, Wooten represents the town when it comes to stormwater review. Most, if not all of these are coming across my desk at the moment, which we're very fortunate and very glad to participate in. With that being said, after we go through our review process, we provide comments back on items that we've seen. The next slide, I'll give you a little insight into some of the things that we take a look at. But we provide any type of comments, feedback, additional requests for information back to the larger DRC. And we go through a little bit of an iteration process where we request the information, make sure that the information is provided, and what is provided matches federal, state, and local rules. Finally, after we get through all of this, we meet in a DRC setting, and the project either is released for construction or released to go to the planning board, whichever path is appropriate for that specific one. So, excuse me. So as a project comes in, particularly on the stormwater side, there are a lot of different parts and pieces that are reviewed. Essentially, what we're looking at is not only federal requirements, but we're looking at state requirements. Think the North Carolina BMP manual. We're also looking at specific ordinances and the manual of standard and designs that the town has adopted and implements. So there's a lot of triggering things that we look for: development size, the level of impervious cover for a particular development. We also start taking a look at some of the flow characteristics. You can imagine that a site, a subdivision, a single site development that has a lot of impervious area naturally has a lot of stormwater runoff of that site. There's not as much open ground, pervious ground, if you will, for the stormwater to infiltrate in. And so that bullet there, pre-development versus post-development, that directly ties into the question that we have from your citizen, the questions that we had from Mr. Paramore. What your guidance, or what your ordinance dictates, and this is at the state and the local level, is that the developer and their engineer have to prove to us that at certain storm events, that the stormwater runoff from that site before a shovel was ever put in the ground, before a driveway was ever poured, will be the exact same flow after they're done with construction. And there's different parts and pieces that they can use to make sure that happens. But that's what we're referring to with pre-development versus post-development. One of the other items we're looking at is stormwater quality. So the majority of all of your nutrients as well as your debris, we have it listed here as total suspended solids. Think of it as small particulates, bits of trash all the way down to microscopic particulates are captured in the first inch of rainfall. Anything above that, and it's already been washed away. And so through the use of BMP devices, or you may hear the term SCM devices, stormwater control measures, we reviewed that on behalf of the submitting engineer to make sure that they followed proper procedure, they met the minimum state requirements, and that the device is designed at least to state level. Looking further, just a couple items that are included depending on the particular design. We look at everything from any requested exemptions that they may try to claim to get out of having to do some of the stormwater requirements. We look and see if the development is considered low density or high density, everything from pipe diameters all the way to making sure that they have proper access easements. The reason that is important, we'll get to actually in about 2 slides, is as the town is going through these MS4 programs, as you're getting more ingrained in the reporting, your staff needs to have the legal authority to visit these sites. So as part of the state's documents, as part of the requirements through your DRC program, we make sure that any device that's put in, your staff has legal authority to access, and that's typically done through an access easement. When a review comes in, depending on the size of the review, how much pre-conversation we've had with the developer or with staff, we typically are able to turn our comments around within a week to 2 weeks. As I like to tell any developer that I get the opportunity to talk with, we don't want to be a hindrance to the process. We want to be an asset, but at the same time, we represent the town and the town's interest. And so we do understand that time is money on their behalf. We want to make sure that Winterville is considered a friendly developer environment within reason. We don't want to see corners cut. We don't want to see people trying to get out of the minimum standards. However, we do try to get any type of review turned back as quickly as we can to make sure that they don't view the town in a negative light. I mentioned stormwater control measures, and this is certainly a much larger conversation and dissertation. In fact, Dr. Hunt, as I mentioned, would certainly be able to describe this much, much better than I ever could. But just a small glimpse into what is a stormwater control measure. Again, they serve 2 primary functions. They either attenuate water, essentially a temporary hold of it, and or they provide treatment of that water. It gives the stormwater runoff an opportunity to release some of the nutrients that is captured, or release some of the pollutants that have been collected. So it's much easier for trash, debris to be captured in a stormwater pond than to try and fish it out of a river. What you see in front of you on the top right is an example of a wet pond. It's a very elaborate and a very decorative wet pond. But on the left-hand side of that is considered the forebay area. Essentially, it's a design feature within the larger pond that reduces some of the turbulence of all the water coming in. It allows some of the sediment to drop out before reaching the larger portion of the water body. The bottom right picture is an example of permeable pavement. So this is an engineered structure that is structural in the fact that you can walk on it, you can drive on it, you can use it for parking, greenways, shopping centers, what have you, but it does serve as an attenuation device and can serve as a treatment device. And then the bottom left picture, the technical term is a bioretention pond or a bioretention cell, a fancier term that's easier to digest as a rain garden. But it is, again, an engineered structure where everything from the top all the way to the bottom of the structure has very specific media, very specific depths, and has the ability to capture stormwater runoff and provide treatment. This is the last slide, and then I'll open it up for questions. As I mentioned, as the town is going through your MS4 process, you're going through your ordinance process, there are going to be some things that we need to keep in mind moving forward that are different from how you operate today. With the phase 2, the MS4 requirements, there will be, as I mentioned, an increased need and requirement to do reporting and post-construction inspection. In fact, you already have some of those in your ordinance now, but the state is going to be taking a much harder look, making sure that we actually follow through on some of those requirements. This will include that within the documents, you include strategies for structural and non-structural BMPs. So these are recommendations or guidance in your documents. They want to make sure that you have ordinances requiring those. You already have that, but they will be tailored and will be modified with some of these new reports. And then they're looking for the last two things, making sure that developers, as well as any time the town implements a structure, that you have the long-term O&M for that. There's very specific operation and maintenance agreements the state has as far as examples. And then they want to define ways that you can quantify all of these items and actions. So they want to see deliverables and one step further, but make it a quantifiable deliverable. They want to see ways that you've created public outreach, ways that you've created public knowledge, public education. They want to see some staff training. They want to see that the town is going back, implementing a tracking process. So for every development that comes in, every stormwater device that is included, we need to start assigning specific ID numbers so that the town can then track those. Every year you'll be required to do an inspection of a certain percentage of those devices. Every developer should be submitting an annual report to you as we speak. But a lot of these new ordinances will have a little bit more teeth to them to make sure that they are submitting that document to you, the regulatory body, and then that you guys are afforded the opportunity to go out and inspect the structures. I've got the last bullet there as a certified BMP inspector. It is recommended that the town have somebody on their behalf, whether it be an internal staff or a third-party individual that has gone through the BMP training course. I myself have done it. I've actually gone through it twice now, once to get certified and then a renewal. It's a very educational course. It puts a very positive light on when you approach a BMP structure. This is what you need to look for. These are the things that you need to make sure hit the checklist, and really provides a little bit of that technical background and technical knowledge for the staff or the credence of the program. With that, I think I've thrown a lot of terms, a lot of acronyms at you, and would certainly appreciate the opportunity to clarify anything that you may have questions on, or offer a little bit of additional conversation if you have it.
Okay. Thank you.
Go back over what BMP stands for, please.
Best management practice.
Mr.
And that term is being converted to stormwater control measure. They're seen as being interchangeable.
Well, Will, Lord, I know you are, but I was going to say, seeing that this is well-vetted process, it's a well-vetted process, before it ever hits the ground.
Yes, sir.
And then with the new stuff that you were talking about, it's going to make it even more
Yes.
streamlined.
Yes, sir. And this process is very similar with any entity. City of Greenville has their process. You know, go to City of New Bern. You know, every medium to larger entity has some form of your DRC process. And certainly stormwater is one piece of that overall cog.
And also, too, I thought it was very interesting that we're considered as a Phase 2 community.
Yes, sir.
And being a rural area.
Yes, and really some of the triggering things of that were population size and then customer count, your proximity to the town of, the city of Greenville, being in the Neuse River Basin. You know, all these things are items that kind of bump you up on that list. And with the growth of the town of Winterville, it has proven to be a good classification. It's given you guys the opportunity to review and have input to development, which came at a very good time.
Is there any other questions for Mr. Will?
Yes, I have one. Mr. Lawson, you said that you have to be certified for the BMP to be an inspector. And you said that you have been through the course twice.
Yes, sir.
Are you certified to teach a class and to help certify?
I am not certified to teach.
Okay.
But several of the things that they do teach within the program, and they do offer the opportunity to become certified. However, Dr. Hunt and Dr. Lord, who oversee that program, you would be hard-pressed to find anyone better to teach it than those two individuals. But
Brian, thank you. That's a great time.
I'm trying to tee you up, Dr. Hunt.
You have, that's warmed my heart.
Well, Dr. Hunt was one of my professors at State, so I can speak from firsthand experience, but several of the things they teach you, as I mentioned, is on a practical level, but then one of the big things that is a takeaway is what not to do. Certainly, it is an engineered structure. As far as designing how big of an orifice you need, how big of an outlet do you need, so on and so forth. And so they go through that course and define very well where that limitation is. Once you cross that line is where you start getting into legal trouble if you're not considered a licensed engineer. And so they have that line in the sand, if you will, very well established for individuals that go through the process. These are the things that are within your wheelhouse, within your area to make comment on. These are the things that you need to go to somebody who is a licensed individual to do. They offer the class.
And just as an aside, we do take it on the road. Now, to be fair, because of COVID, we haven't. But we are on the cusp of doing that again, Brian. I know it's not in Winterville proper, but we do go to Wilson, which certainly is a pretty easy drive for y'all to get there. And chances are pretty good that we'll do this in Wilson in 2022, an in-person offering. We also offer this workshop virtually. In-person is obviously better, but we do offer the workshop virtually too. And we'll do that, but at least in the summer as well. But I do think we'll be in Wilson, which is pretty close to y'all later on this year.
And once you're certified, it's good for 3 years before you have to renew your certification. And then it's just a half-day program, a half-day refresher at that point.
Well, let me ask this question, Terry and Brian, somebody, because we hired the Wooten Company, we able to use his certification?
Well, I believe that, yes, Will's doing most of our stormwater
Right,
review
right.
currently, so yes, I would think
So that helps us by having you.
It does, yeah,
Okay.
and the mechanism that we represent the town is through the on-call, and that way, we're doing this as an hourly rate, if you will, on behalf of the town. It's a lot easier than coming back to the town for a task order or something for every single review, every
Right.
single phone call. And so as you start moving into more on-site inspections, we can certainly offer that in that capacity or set something up a little bit different if it appeases the town.
All right, that's what I was trying to get at.
Yes.
Right, okay.
We're trying not to kill Will, but at the same time, he's certainly doing a variety of things for us currently, and we appreciate it.
Okay. and
Thanks, Will.
All right.
Mark, you need to be excused.
Yeah, I've got to be
You got another engagement?
Thank
Next up, we have Dr. Will Hunt from North Carolina State University. We want to say thank you for participating with us tonight. So you're on the clock now.
It's my pleasure. I just stopped teaching class and then got on here. So it's my pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Yes, so Dr. Hunt, you're feel free to go ahead and share your screen. I'll allow you to share your screen when you're ready, and you can just take off and go. Obviously, you heard a portion of Will's.
I appreciate that. Well, I'll be honest with you, I just wanted to help answer any questions that might come up.
Okay.
And I figured I would just answer the questions y'all had, and if it does make sense for me to go to PowerPoint to answer some of those questions, I'm happy to do that.
Well, Dr. Hunt, what our biggest concern around here is what citizens are concerned about is stormwater ponds. Can you give us your take on these stormwater ponds, how they're developed, what's the capacities, and all that?
Sure. Yes, I'm happy to do that. Wet ponds are sort of one of the old tricks in the bag that engineers have been using 30 years. I mean, it's been a while. I mean, even older than that in some parts of the state. But Eastern Carolina, at least 30 years. And the principle that they were designed for, and Brian mentioned in this presentation, of course, he went through a lot of stuff in that presentation too, that I was able to gather, is that they were designed to help prevent flooding. And for the most part, ponds they do a pretty good job of that. There's a number of things that they fall flat on. One of the biggest problems that they're not particularly good is it actually can lead to erosion downstream by the way that the pond releases water. And ponds do okay they do fine for pollutant removal, but Brian also alluded to some of these other practices that are used that tend to be a little bit better at removing pollution than ponds do. And then some of the ponds can be designed to be pretty nice. Brian, you showed a nice picture of one of them. I assume that was in Penn County. But there are some nice, they can be attractive, but if they're not heavily managed, then they'll also, in the summer especially, become, sort of algae infested. And so those are some of the issues. And that may be why y'all have the question to begin with, is that they can look unsightly, which does, but if they're unsightly, that may or may not mean necessarily that they're not working well from a stormwater perspective. Often they are, but even though they're not looking good. But they can be unsightly. They actually had issue with some ponds. In Wilmington, where some dogs ran in and they got some toxin from all that algae, and those dogs actually died, which is crazy. But that's an isolated case, but it has happened. And so the reason I'm saying that is because of the ponds somewhat checkers. It's not like unsuccessful as a practice, but it's sort of limited as to how well they work sometimes. Some of these other practices have taken off, like in Greenville. There's a lot of constructed stormwater wetlands used. And the reason Greenville used those is because they tend to knock down the algae. And that's a plus. The bioretention that Brian mentioned and the permeable pavement, those are other practices that are now used a lot more. And where you have some sandy soils down there, I mean, not everywhere, but there are some sandy spots. I know at ECU, for a while, some permeable pavement was used outside of Dowdy Ficklen Stadium. So there are some places that these other practices can work and are good sort of substitutes or surrogates for wet ponds. But still, most designers, their initial thought usually is to go to the wet pond, because that's when they've been designing for the last 30 years, rather than doing something that maybe more like 10 years old or 15 years old.
Well, again, Dr. Hunt, we always hear that these ponds are not any good. We keep hearing that over and over, that these ponds are not designed to do what they're supposed to do. You know, and I think that's where we're trying to make sure that we get the clarification. I don't know whether you clarified it then, but, you know, for our citizens, we want to make sure that we're giving them everything that they need to know, that making sure that the town is being accountable for what we're supposed to be doing here when the developer comes in and they put in these stormwater ponds.
Right. Yes, sir. Well, ponds are not the end-all, be-all practice. They're just not. As I mentioned, they do have limitations. But if they are designed right, they will tend to, the main thing that they were put in for originally is to help reduce flooding. And a well-designed pond and a well-maintained pond will do that. They will do that. Ponds are also good at reducing sediment. And for a while, that was the main pollutant in the state. In Pitt County, now we worry a lot about nitrogen and phosphorus, and in ponds they're kind of old school, and they're not as good at nitrogen and phosphorus removal as, say, constructed wetlands are. So, I mean, it's hard for me to say that they're no good. I mean, ponds do tend to supply some services, right? But they're not the silver bullet, and especially where there is a requirement, as there is in Pitt County, and good chunk of East North Carolina, to get rid of nitrogen and phosphorus. Ponds are below the line compared to wetlands and bioretention and some of these other newer practices that Ron mentioned. So I know this isn't quite say that they're bad, because they're not always bad, but depends on what you put them in for. They can actually be good, especially if they're maintained. But they don't deliver as much as some of these other practices do.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions for Dr. Hunt?
Yes, Dr. Hunt, I hear you mention the upkeep of a pond, and usually when the first developer comes in and develop an area and place a pond in, everything is being upkept. It's being taken care of. As time move on, that's where our problem, I think, that it lies, that it go unattended. We need some education on that part to continue to have our pond upkeep during a period when the developers no longer can be reached.
Yes, sir. That is a very good point. It is a very real point. That the handoff often between the developer and, let's say, an HOA is not always the smoothest. I mean, in terms of the amount of information that gets conveyed. And one of the big issues, if a pond, any stormwater control measure, any of them, all right, but ponds being maybe principal among them, if it's not explained to the HOA what has to be done, then the pond can certainly evolve to a place where it's not performing as well as it was when it was under the more consistent care of a developer. And that's part of the reason why there are many firms out there that specialize in pond and other stormwater control measure maintenance. And it tends to be that the big box stores will employ one of these big firms, and as a rule, the commercial ponds tend to be a little more reliably kept than HOA ponds. And the part of it is because the HOA just is not made, at least it's not emphatically stated to them that y'all must take care of this for it to work. So maintenance is absolutely necessary. I like to tell people, we talked about stormwater. Stormwater is infrastructure. cleans water, it mitigates flooding, and just like wastewater, treatment plants are infrastructure. They clean the water, and you would never think to build a wastewater treatment plant and just then completely ignore it, right? And that's how I look at stormwater. You don't want to build these things and then just completely ignore them.
You kind of lit.
So it ends up being incumbent upon communities to make sure, and this is what the state, when the state passes the, like, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, one of the things the state will check when they visit Ron or whoever's the person they're visiting there in Winterville, they're going to want to see what types of programs are in place for maintenance to make sure that the town has the means of making sure these practices are inspected and maintained. Because without it, the practices, I'm not saying they're going to stop working, but they'll stop working as well. They won't work as good. And it can be a significant drop off.
I think that kind of led into my next question for you was the difference with stormwater and flooding. I think people kind of get these two things mixed up.
Yeah, that is a fair statement. I've got one of my best friends lives in Winterville, and he uses this analogy that you can't keep 7 foot. Meaning, like, if someone's 7 feet, they have an advantage over me playing basketball. All right, just how it is. And so, the same way with the stormwater control measure is you can't treat 2 foot. Meaning, if it rains 2 feet, that's different. That's different. And the stormwater control measures, ponds, whatever that we put in, they're gonna make that much of a difference on the 2 foot rain. And so people do need to have a realistic expectation of what stormwater devices can deliver. All right, and that's part of that is on us as engineers to make sure that word gets out. That there's really only so much a practice is going to do to limit flooding from massive rains. But where stormwater control measures do have an impact on flooding is when it rains 3 inches or 4 inches or 5 inches. Those, you can design stormwater control measures to have to provide a noticeable improvement for those size storms, for those size storm events. I'm not saying it eliminates it, but it certainly makes improvements to it. And so maybe roads that often wash out or wash over are less likely to wash over on a 4-inch rain if you use stormwater control measures. And so it's just important to understand what an SCM can do. It's not going to fix 2 foot of rain, but it can certainly have an impact on 3, 4, and 5 inches of rain. The flooding associated with 3, 4, and 5 inches of rain. And we do get nuisance flooding from those storms.
Doctor,
If the storm has a first name, it's associated with a hurricane, and that's not, stormwater control measure is not going to do a whole lot to help out with a major hurricane yet.
Dr. Hunt, these 3, 4, and 5 inch, these 3 and 4, even 5-inch storms that we're having more and more frequently, these stormwater control measures help in that the water recedes in an appropriate amount of time. That doesn't mean that the water still won't stand for a short period of time. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is correct. Y'all are a lot flatter there than we are here. And as a result, when you get bigger rains, I mean, a 4-inch rain is a big rain, but we also are getting them like once a year at least, right? You're going to have some ponded water. Because remember, when it's flat, the water table's closer to the surface, there's just nowhere for the water to go. I mean, it eventually soaks into the ground, but it's just limited where the water's going to go. It's not like you're able to flush it down. Like, the issue go up into the mountains of North Carolina is that the water doesn't linger very long. But you don't want to be at the very end because then it hits you real hard, right? In North Carolina, it kind of just, it goes to the low-lying areas and it hangs around for a while and eventually soaks in. But that's not going to happen in 4 hours, that's for sure. What the stormwater control measures can do is prevent neighborhoods, I'm not saying parts of neighborhoods or low-lying areas, but they can prevent neighborhoods from flooding during those size storm events. But you're going to have standing water after a 4-inch rain, whether nature of where y'all are located, topography, in and around Winterville.
Thank you.
You're not alone. There's no problem. I mean, Newburgh doesn't have a lot. I mean, Little Washington, everyone's dealing with that issue.
Anyone else have any? We'll check. We'll check to see anybody online have any questions, Brian, for Dr. Hunt.
Yeah, the mayor was just asking if anybody online would have any questions for Dr. Hunt.
Mayor, I appreciate all the questions that have been asked.
No. No questions.
Okay. If not, Dr. Hunt, we, again, we appreciate you taking time out tonight to be a part of this discussion with us here. I think you helped bring some valid points to us, and we appreciate all that you do.
Well, Mayor, thank you. It's my privilege to help. I'm a state specialist, and I serve all of North Carolina. So if Brian or someone, if you have questions that arise a little bit later, you write them down. I will be happy to answer all of those. It may be that I come back when I'm not teaching, and I actually have a PowerPoint just to answer the questions you've given me.
Okay.
But I am happy to do that. Just let local extension know, and Brian's or maybe local extension let me know, and I'm happy to be a part of that.
We appreciate that, and if you get the information, I think when you say you'll be in Wilson, whenever y'all have the thing in Wilson, if you'll let Brian know, I'm pretty sure, I know I would like to attend to kind of keep myself knowledgeable of what's going on. Okay?
Well, thank y'all very much, and I wish you a
Thank
pleasant
you.
evening.
Thank you.
You too, thank you.
Thank you. And also to, I want to thank Mr. Paramore, of course, Mr. Lawson, thank you for taking time out this evening, and also to our staff, Ryan and Stephen and the rest of the staff that's over there came out tonight. Appreciate y'all taking your time out to come out for this stormwater workshop. Hopefully that we gave some great information. Hopefully the citizens, excuse me, that was listening, hopefully they got some good information also. And as he said, I think it would go with any of the presenters. If they have any questions, people that was online, if they have any questions, if they would email them to Brian, and Brian would make sure that he disseminate them to who they need to go and get back with them as far as that's concerned. But if anyone else don't have any other discussions, I'm gonna call this meeting adjourned. We
Motion. So moved.
so moved.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor, vote by saying aye. Aye. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.